Hello and welcome to the Strongroom. My name's Dan Cullen and today I'll be talking to Sheri MacMillan from MacMillan Estate Planning. I think some people can be put off thinking about wills. So what do you mean when you say that estate planning is about life?
So I think one of the prominent myths about estate planning is that it's about dying. And actually it's the opposite. It's about your life. What do you want your life to mean? What things in your life do you want to accomplish? What is your purpose? And it doesn't have to be some grandiose purpose. And I think at large the community right now is talking about, what is your purpose in this really grand way. What I would like to say to all our families that we work with is what I've come to learn is that mostly what purpose is to most families is love, loving their family, and showing that in a measure, whatever that may mean to them. So we have lots of families that show their love to their community through their church organization, or we have families, the grandmas who babysit all the grandbabies while their children are building careers, and that's wonderful as well. And so it changes, of course, year by year as we all individually grow as people. And so the supporting mechanisms to meet those objectives change. So you may need different legal infrastructure based on what you're up to, or you might need your finances to be designed differently because you're now building, a charity in Africa. Or you may want to redo some of your tax work because you're not now working and you're in retirement. So these are moving targets, but what's important is what is your goals and what are your purposes and what are your desires and dreams. And we tease at MacMillan sometimes, we sometimes call it freedom fighting. We're fighting so that you feel free to do what your heart's desires are and your purpose. And so I think from my own point of view, I think that's wonderful. And I think that MacMillan has the blessing to have the opportunity in the community to support that and be people's ear and encouragement, because we always are very self-critical. And more recently we were working with a family that has had a very successful career, but now is in the phase of their life that what succession and what success means to them is now to give back in the community. And so they've taken on this, to me, a very large project of building orphanages in Africa. And they take the grandchildren with them to see these orphanages so that their grandchildren learn how wonderful it is to be privileged.
Can you think of anything that would surprise our viewers about estate planning? Or is there indeed anything that still surprises you?
So estate planning should not be about dying. It should be about what can your estate create for freedom to fulfill your goals and objectives in your life. And if we look at it from that point of view, it's much more exciting. It's not a fearful topic. Instead, it becomes a wonderful topic. And we want to spend time and energy in this area. It's really important too because we're living so long. In fact, right now, most of us may live to 100. And so they're saying that we'll be in retirement longer than we were during our working career.
Really?
So it's a really long time when you think about it. And so if that's the case, we probably do want to have some plans or some objectives to find purpose. And so we're seeing now today a lot of people are not giving up work the way they used to. They're continuing on, maybe part-time or choosing projects. We're seeing families now share their estate through life instead of waiting until the end of life, because they don't get the blessing then of seeing how it can impact their children and grandchildren. And so in a way they lose out by not doing that in their own lifespan. And so we're seeing a very different dynamic about life planning and estate planning than we've ever seen before in the community at large.
And how did you get into this business and where did you get your start?
When I started the company, I was a very young, naive person. I was only 24, and I just had a vision that the community was not being served appropriately in these particular areas of tax, law, investment planning, and it was like everybody was working in a tunnel vision approach. So, families would go see their accountant and the accountant would say, this is how you should do things. And then they'd have to go see their lawyer and figure out how they should do things as well. And then they tried to communicate, those jargons back and forth to the different professionals. And it was quite difficult, obviously, for any family to do that. And so through my career, as I had the opportunity to work in varying institutions. The last one was a banking institution. And what I found was that people were not considered people. Alternatively, what was happening is we were considered an account number. And whenever you're considered an account number, then you're going to get a blanket answer that everyone gets. And that's really not to our advantage.
Right, yeah, I see.
And so I saw a real gap and an opportunity to help families appropriately in this area. So the last resort for me was, and the thing that pushed me over the edge to start MacMillan, was I was working with such a lovely elderly couple, and they had a GIC to renew, and they were only around 80. They were that young. And what ended up happening is they really didn't know what they wanted to do with the proceeds. And I didn't know if they needed it for income. I didn't know if they wanted to gift it to their family. I really knew nothing as their advisor, even though I was an advisor to them. They were really just an account number with a GIC. And so that particular day, I remember saying to the clients, well, why don't you go home and sleep on things and then come back with some objectives and goals for me? And in the interim, I'm just going to deposit it into a short-term T-bill that you can cash every day, and then we can make a more appropriate decision. Well, that was, for my career path, certainly a no-no. And the reason for that was I got brought in with the manager and spoken to that, I really didn't work for the client. I worked for the institution, being the bank. And so what would have been in the best interest of the bank, of course, is to lock in that GIC again for another 5 or 8 year term. But in my own conscience, I obviously can't do that when somebody's in their 80s, and for all we know, they might need it for elder care in a few months, or they may want to share it and take a holiday with their family. And so I went home to my husband that night and I just said, I really can't do my career this way. I think I need to quit my job. And I hope you don't mind. If I do this, we're going to be really poor, and I don't know how long. And graciously, he must love me a lot, because he said, yes, I'll support you, you crazy woman. And off I went into entrepreneurship.
So what would you say to viewers who, like me, I'm afraid, to get them to say, right, come to me and let's get this sorted out now. Let's get my future sorted.
Sure. So I'd say most of our families, have a desire to not only enjoy life, but also to protect their loved ones. And so one of the common things that we're seeing more and more in society is, because of the longevity that we have of life, there is a substantial risk that you may lose your spouse and continue on, decades later. And so what does that look like? Because historically we were all passing around the same time horizon, but that's not happening today. And so we're seeing more and more of our families come in and ask us, okay, my husband and I, we've been married 20 years, and if he were to pass, how would I be protected? And ultimately, what if I passed? How would he be protected? Now, this is a really valid question, and the reason it's so valid is this. Because we're living so long, how do we protect our spouse if we're not here to protect them and they become involved in a second relationship? And this is common. Most of us will have a second relationship in our life or more. And so when you think of it from that point of view, you and your husband or wife have worked really hard to create this estate, and now you're going to enjoy your retirement life. And if one of you passes young, and the other spouse meets somebody new, it can jeopardize the whole life plan you've created. It could wipe it out in a minute. And so it's a very dangerous position not to think about and to talk about and plan around. The great part is there's a solution though. And so, when I'm working with families like this, sometimes I'm the devil's advocate and said, have you ever thought of if you lost one of you young? And how would we deal with that? But as we get going down the road, the protection that we use is estate planning, and there's a special tool called a trust that we can use to protect the spouse that's left behind. And the great part is, when we do that, they may enter a second or third relationship in life, but their retirement's never at risk because it's acting like a natural prenup for the future relationships they may have. And so what we've done is protected their whole retirement phase of life. We protected their life. And then in turn, not only does it protect their life, it protects the legacy. Because now if that capital or asset base remains with that person to provide lifestyle through their life, we know for certainty it will go to the children. Whereas most families have that desire. And one of the things that I always tell families is, it's very normal for for you to want your estate to stay in your bloodline, meaning in your own family genealogy. Not many of us want it to go to an ex. And that's common in every family, no matter how affluent they are. You know, the Queen of England isn't passing out her estate to everyone. The only people that are going to benefit from that estate are her family members. And that's true of our heart's desire. Regardless of the size of our estate, we have that need in our community and in our family units. And the great part is there's a solution so that we can be certain that what we worked hard for, why we've created it, the values, the beliefs, we can protect it so that it is a legacy only for family. And you know, I hope every family has wonderful marriages, of course, but in the event they don't, then we're not risking everything everybody has worked hard for.
So, you know, I'm making a little like an interview because you have a friend, you want to get his voice in there. So, okay, so actually this is good because, you know, it actually, you know, protects a person who's not used to in getting into relationships from predatory relationships, right?
That's right. And so one of the things that we have to think about is, you know, and when we enter into our retirement phase of life, and if we lose our spouse younger, we're often very vulnerable at that moment in time because we're losing perhaps our very best friend of our life. And one of the issues are if you have affluence, you are potentially a candidate for somebody to take advantage of you. And hopefully that's not the case, but very sadly in my career, 1 or 2 times I've seen it the case. And so what we want to do is we want to give you the freedom, if you're left on your own, for the next life expectancy for yourself, you know, to live life, to enjoy new relationships and thrive. But what we don't want to do is put you at risk to people that may be coming to be in relationship with you for the wrong reason. And so by building an estate plan around you, we know that if they're entering the relationship, they will see clearly that they will have no financial benefit. And so hopefully they're entering the relationship with you for the right reason, because they have love for you. And so we actually call this formula the MacMillan dating service. And we laugh, but you know, in all sincerity, you want that liberty and freedom, you know, if you do lose your spouse, to be able to move forward. But you don't want to do it with wondering if the motivation is the wrong motivation. And so I think it's really important for each of us, while our spouses are both with us, to build in this protection for our loved ones. And we can do the same type of planning for our children too. And that's the great part, is we should, because many of our children will experience divorce, of course. And so we don't want them to lose their inheritance in that way either.
Finally, I know that charity is important to you.
I would say that the charitable work that I do is driven from a selfish point of view, truly. And the reason for that is when I was quite young, I've always been driven to participate in the community and give back, but I never really connected the dots as to why until I read this one particular study. And it was Deepak and Harvard that had done some research actually on this particular area. And so they talked about happiness and why people are happy. And so the study showed that people are happy based on 10% of their genetics. So however you're born, you're either born happy or grouchy, and that's just the reality. Now, I've been blessed, luckily, I was born the happy one, so that gives me an edge, certainly. The next 40% though is interesting. It's actually what you choose to think and your mindset. So you can choose to be positive, you can choose to be negative, and certainly through my work I've observed that those that choose a more positive outlook on life certainly seem to be much happier. And so I try earnestly to do that, although it's not always easy when you meet life challenges, but it's always in the back of my mind that that's my responsibility to myself, is to make sure that I'm thinking in mostly a positive way, not entirely negatively all the time. But lastly, the thing that really hit me, and it hit my heart in this study, was the most important thing, if you're happy, is how much you serve the community. 50%. 50% of whether you're happy or not is how you give back. And I know it rings true for me because whenever I'm participating in that privilege of giving back, whatever cause it may be, you know, you go away with a more open heart, you feel happy, you feel like you contributed, and I think, and you feel connected. And I think by doing those kinds of things in your life, they snowball. And so then the more you do them, the more joy you have, and then it's just a natural evolution that you need to do it for your own happiness. And that's why I say it's a selfish endeavor, giving back, because at the end of the day, it makes me happy.
About your conservation work with wild elephants in Africa?
So it was probably a decade ago, I had the opportunity to watch a documentary on BBC, and it was about these tiny orphaned elephants, these little babies, and how they were being rescued by this family in Africa. And what had occurred is, of course, there is a lot of poaching in Africa, and so these little orphaned elephants were left to die. And so they were brought into this particular sanctuary, and these gentlemen that were basically from the community were recuperating with the animals. And how they were doing so is they were actually sleeping with the animals every night. And I watched this, and the little baby's trunk was holding the hands of their keeper, and they had little blankets on them. And the challenge was that the keepers had to get up every 3 hours to feed these little elephants for 3 calendar years. And so, you know, I watched that, and it just pulled at my heart like you cannot imagine. And I remember saying to my husband that I'm going to leave you when I'm 50 for elephants. And he laughed and said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm having an affair of the heart. I need to go and participate in this. It would just be a dream come true for me." And I didn't think much about it, but just kind of set that in my mind as a goal for when I turned 50. So 5 years prior to that, I was reading a book because I travel so much for work on the plane, and I love reading, and I'm an avid reader. And so I read this book on life, love, and elephants. And the story just moved me. It was about a woman, her name is David Sheldrick, and Daphne Sheldrick, and she lost her husband young, under 30, and she had 2 small children while she was living in Africa as a white woman, all alone. And yet, what ended up occurring in her life is she was courageous and was in the midst of trying to save an orphaned elephant, a baby elephant. And of course, unfortunately, it died because she hadn't figured out how to do so yet. And so, as her book went on, she talked about, you know, the struggle she had to find the solution of how to feed these little elephants. And eventually she did. She was successful. And then, unfortunately, at the point where she was successful with his one little baby with the formula, she was needing to attend a wedding, and so off she went for a couple of weeks to do that. And what ended up occurring is the little elephant had lost its second mom, being Daphne, at that juncture, and it quit eating and it died. And it just broke my heart that these little ones, you know, need such support from us, and we're the ones who are causing this pain in their lives because we're the ones killing them. So I read more about Daphne, and I finished the book, and the evolution of Daphne's career is that it's 3 legacies. So she not only changed the world on how to save these little orphaned elephants, but the Queen herself of England knighted her for this work. And so we consider her the Jane Goodall of elephants in the world. And luckily, her children took on the same passion. And so they are actually running the foundation now in Africa, her 2 daughters. And she has grandsons, and they are now running the anti-poaching arm of the organization. So once I read that book about 5 years ago, I realized that it had been the documentary I had watched 5 years prior. So now I had a lot more information, and my personality is to always ask. I always tell people, well, ask. You don't know if you don't ask. And so I wrote her right away, and I said, I love your book. I love your life story. You are an absolutely amazing angel in our society, and you know, I really aspire to be like you. And I am wondering if you would give us the privilege here in Canada to bring the organization international, because they'd already brought it internationally into the United States and Britain, but they did not have an arm in Canada. And it was the very next day, Daphne herself contacted me and said she would be honored to do that. And so we got to work right away out of the gate, getting them approved through Canada Revenue Agency to be a chartered charity here in Canada. And we were very blessed that it all came together in time. So we announced this for our 20th anniversary party for the company, that the Sheldrick Fund now exists here in Canada. And for me, I'm really, really grateful of the timing, all of it, because unfortunately we lost Daphne a few months later. And it makes my heart happy to know that before she passed, she knew that her organization had blossomed into an international organization in the world, and that her love of elephants will have a true legacy in our community and will go on into the future. And so it's a lot of joy for all of us. I think everyone in our office probably has adopted 1 million little baby elephants. Every client of ours gets one, whether they like it or not. And we hope that we can make a difference in the world. And I'm happy to say that they have made a dramatic difference, because although they've raised all these little baby orphans to full maturity at 3 years of age after feeding them for every 3 hours for 3 years, they now have been able to integrate them back into the wild. And the great part is, not only have they integrated them back into the wild, these babies have now had babies in the wild. And the special part to me about that is not only that they're back in the wild, but that the babies that we helped as a community bring their children babies, back to the reserve so that everybody can meet them. So you can't say we're not making an impact in a soul. We just might not realize how we are at this point because we don't understand it scientifically. But certainly I think elephants, and for that matter, all of our animals, are our legacy. They're our right in humankind to continue them. And I think that we owe that to ourselves and our children's children. So we really do hope that this message motivates us in the community, and we have many, many of our families who utilize our new charity to raise funds for these elephants in Africa, and it's a wonderful Christmas present to many people. It's a wonderful grandchild present to watch your elephant. So if you were to go on to our website, it's called the Strongroom, and you'll see your elephant there, and it only costs $50 a year to feed a baby orphan elephant. And when you do an adoption of the elephant, you actually get to follow it all through the course of the year. You learn its history, its story, and you get a little certificate of its birth. And also you get all of the information as it's released into the wild and if it has children in the future. So we have many, many families who are certainly enjoying this venture.
Okay, Sheri, thank you very much. That was fantastic. That brings us to the end of our time today. Our viewers can find out more by going to the website at MacMillan Estate Planning. My name's Dan Cullen, and this has been The Strongroom.